Hello again. It's me, your favorite nighttime guard for the Cashmere Botanical Gardens. I thought I might pop in and tell you how the new management's working out, since it's only been a few months since hostile takeover seems to suit what happened best, but I suppose most of us that were involved would be considered the hostile ones. I'm settling into my new life pretty well, though being a brandy-low has some changes. I haven't really got used to all of them yet. For one, my food budget has gone down to zero since I don't really need to eat anymore. I take all my nourishment from just being in close proximity to the lady, which has also facilitated a move into the park. Since being a brandy-low doesn't really pay anything, this was probably for the best, since it would have made paying rent difficult. I was a little miffed about that at the start, but Randy explained it all to me, and I feel like I have a better grasp on it. We ain't human anymore, partner. We're servants to the lady now, and as her vassals, this is all we need. After all that, things got a lot easier. The Botanical Gardens were closed for a few weeks, so we could get everything ready for the grand reopening ceremony. I told you all about it at the end of the last story. Dr. Thurston stepped down, and the lady, the townspeople know her as Miss Viridian, officially became the head of the gardens. She's been working tirelessly on the new exhibits, and it's strange to watch what she does. I told you once that the lady seemed both hundreds of years old and new as spring flowers. As she works, this is made very apparent. She doesn't have to wait, this lady of the growing season. She isn't impatient, she isn't impetuous, but she has no time for things like seasons or growing cycles. She brings flowers to maturity in the blink of an eye, and then makes them live long past their days. I don't think anyone notices this. Who notices one particular flower over another, right? But when you spend all your time at the park, you tend to notice new growth, and the intricate nature of the existing growth. I've been thinking about things like that a lot. Growth cycles and the like. I never used to, and it's kind of strange. That was how we came to notice the disturbance for the first time, and it gave me a shudder. It all began when I found Randy on top of the water tower we keep on the property. He was looking at something with his binoculars, and he didn't seem to like it, whatever it was. I was up the ladder and beside him in a flash, my new body still surprising even me, and he seemed unsurprised to find me at his elbow. "Something's coming," he said, offering me the binoculars. I looked through them into the wide swath of woods that grew behind the garden, and saw something shaking the trees. It was big, whatever it was, and as it passed through the forest, it shook the tops of the verdant sea. I wasn't sure how I felt about it, the rumbling making it seem like an army was marching out, and when I handed the binoculars back, I asked if he knew what it was. "Not sure, but it looks like we'll know sometime tomorrow." Turns out, Randy was mistaken. I would discover what it was later that night. It may seem silly for a group of creatures like us to need security, but I guess some habits die hard. Night shifts are easier now, since I don't really need to sleep anymore. The closest I come to sleeping is lying in the tall grass that surrounds the reflecting pool and closing my eyes. I don't really dream, but sometimes I see flashes of things. They're like little movies from long ago times. I'm not sure what they are, but they make me feel nostalgic somehow, even though I don't seem to be the one living in them. Sorry, I was wool gathering. It's harder to focus my mind sometimes than it used to be. Anyway, so I was sitting at the security desk that night, watching cameras and keeping an eye peeled, when something big suddenly slid in front of one of the cameras. I switched over to the picture in question, looking for the source of the movement, but I couldn't find it. It was very reminiscent of the moving trees, the forest friends of the lady, but they had ceased moving after she was done with her coup. They had always been a sort of extension of her will, and their desire to be free of their containment of treedom. I wondered if this might be something similar, and I flipped around to a few other camera angles to see if I could catch it again. When it remained elusive, I picked up my flashlight and went to investigate. I found Randy doing similar as I came around the wheel of exhibits and into the park proper. "Something's here. I caught sight of it, but it's quick." "What do you think it is?" I asked him. "I don't know, but it did a number on the front gate. Kinda came half over it and half through it. I've got some of the other guys fixing it, but we gotta figure out what it is. Help me find it, will you? I don't know if it's of her court or of his. I'd like to know if there's something dangerous in our midst." I nodded, moving off into the shadowy park with my flashlight out. The exhibits were a little different now that the lady had set up shop. Plots that had once contained showings of local flora and rare plants now held strange hybrids, examples of many different species existing together. Even a few areas containing poisonous plants and dangerous fungi. None of it would hurt me. I was a champion of summer now, but it was amazing that we didn't lose more guests to some of the things she just had sitting around. I heard a loud creak behind me and turned to find a scattering of leaves and a discarded bird's nest in the path that had once been clear. Whatever it was heading towards the small grove we had set up last week. The grove was truly spectacular. The lady had an old-growth forest in one of the exhibit rings, and people said it could very well be the only old growth in captivity that they had ever seen. It was amazing how quickly we had brought these trees to maturity, and even now it was something to stand amongst the towering examples of primordial flora. You could see them from anywhere in the park. Hell, you could see them from the parking lot sometimes. And as I approached, I noticed something was out of place. Standing before the old growth of trees like a child standing at the head of a family photo was a much smaller specimen. It stood on roots that looked snaky beneath it. They wiggled against the stones, looking for the dirt that lay below them. The tree had no face, none that I could see, but it was looking at the magnificent bark gargantuans with the same awe that I had felt. I didn't think it was as dangerous as Randy believed. Just another tourist on a sightseeing trip. It's hard to feel regarded by something that doesn't have a face, but I had its full attention as much as it had mine. When it came at me, it sounded like roots groaning in a high wind. It reminded me again of the tree that had nearly run me over on that night not so long ago, and I threw myself aside as it barreled towards me. When it pivoted and came at me again, I realized it might not be as mindless as I had thought it was. "How dare you?" I would have said that it screamed this at me, but screaming doesn't really do it justice. The tree groaned at me. The tree grew at me as its bark creaked and its voice bellowed from deep within. It shook wind from its branches as a gale swam through it. It did all of these. It did none of these. And I was suddenly terrified. Unlike the last time, however, I had grown a little myself. When it shot a wiggling root at me, I caught it and pushed it aside. The tree seemed confused by this, but its rage was no less potent. It scampered at me, scamper being the best word I can think to describe it, and when I leapt aside, it crashed into the stone fence. The structure rattled a little, but the craftsmanship was sturdy, and it held up, if not with a little bit of protest. It was odd to think of a tree being nimble, but this one was quick. No young spruce or spring pine here. This one had some rings in its belly. Case in point, when I went to jump aside again to get out of the way, it caught me with a long tendril and held me fast. Stupid, I thought. I'd been stupid, and now I was caught. It pulled me in close, and I was worried that it meant to smash me against its bark and be done with me. As I drew closer, I saw the bark twist as a face appeared from its depths. The features were old, wood carved 1,000 years ago, and when they came to life, it regarded me with something akin to trepidation. The round wooden eyes blinked owlishly, trying to make sense of me, and as it leaned closer, I tried not to let it see my fear. "Brandy Low, why do you trap my family here? Your lady will not thank you for this." It was my turn to be confused. "I didn't trap anyone. I brought your dying kin here, old one," came the voice of summer, wafting behind me like a cold breeze in the heat of July. We both of us turned, watching as the pale lady came gliding between Randy and another Brandy Low I wasn't as familiar with, Jock or Regis or one of the ones who'd come with her. Randy had his shotgun out, the old symbol of his authority, and the other held a woodsman's axe at the ready. They stood to block her, to protect this ancient being from harm, and when she touched their shoulders, they parted like bat-wing doors. As she approached the old tree, it turned its attention away from me, and bent down to eye level with the mistress of spring. "Why have you imprisoned my kin here, my lady? They want nothing but to grow and flourish within our forest, outside the harassment of axe and flame." When she touched his trunk, the old wood seemed to lighten, and a groan of pleasure ran through his wooden throat. "And they have found it here. When I discovered them, they were close to death. These giants who have seen the rise and fall of centuries were in danger of being lost forever. They sleep now, their bodies regrowing, their minds knitting, and I hope that someday they will be as they were once again." "I would like to see that too," the tree whispered, and when it let me go, I scampered back to stand with Randy and the others. "You all right?" Randy asked, gun at the ready. "Yeah, things quicker than it looks. Don't you worry about that. Regis and I can handle it if it decides not to play nice." I appreciated Randy's zeal, but I was skeptical about what a shotgun could do against something as thick and old as this tree. After some quiet talk, the pale lady put her hands on either side of its wooden face and leaned up to kiss its forehead. Even bent, the tree was massive, and she looked childlike as she balanced on the tips of her toes. As they parted, the tree moved off towards the old growth section, walking amidst its larger brethren as it disappeared into the grove. The lady returned to us, saying it was time to go. "Is he done kicking up Dickens?" Randy asked, falling in behind us. "I believe he is. Racefell is a proud old tree, and I gave him a position worthy of him. That was how we gained a guardian for our grove. Racefell stayed on and tended to his kin, and he seemed to relish the work. He apologized for his rash actions, saying he had misjudged the situation, and I later found out a lot more about the old tree than I can say here. After our initial encounter, Racefell and I became fast friends, and I was glad to have him at our side. The summer had only just begun, but already there was a fair amount of excitement. Who can say what else might come? I suppose I have a long time to find out, don't I? You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.